amazing with our boy Robbie teaching on history. I was a history teacher, and the only two classes they didn't let me say anything were the two history classes. So I don't know. But before we do that, we're going to have some question and answer sessions, or just a question and answer session based upon last week. It's hard to believe that last week, it seems like it's been, you think forever since last week? It seems to me like it was just yesterday we were having a little bit of a Mardi Gras party. So, I don't know. Nonetheless, you guys watched a video about priesthood and marriage. And so we just wanted to see if you had any follow-over questions before we hand the microphone over to Robbie. He only has to cover 750 years, so I don't know how he's going to fill all of his time with that. It seems like there wasn't much that happened. So, questions?
I definitely saw people taking notes the last time, so pretty good questions, I'm sure.
He feels as though you have good questions. Marriage. Right? One of the best movies of all time. Bryn. Can you celebrate a Catholic wedding outside or not in a church? Only if you have particular permission. That's not that easy to come by. But it's not unheard of. And that has to be a really, really good reason. So it's rare to have something like that happen. Follow-up questions always, well, why would you? Why would you not desire to celebrate it in a church with Jesus present in the Eucharist right there? And so. Dara.
I didn't really originally ask, was there a time in which a person marrying, a person brought up in the faith who was Catholic, could not have a wedding with a person who was not Catholic?
Was there ever a time where Catholics could only marry Catholics in the church? Well, for the first 1,500 years, there's pretty much only Catholics. And so then it would be a question of can you marry a non-Christian? And again, probably there would have been some pretty strict regulations upon marrying a non-Christian with certain permissions. There's still permissions today. And even permission to marry a non-Catholic, you have to get certain signatures and things like that. So I would imagine, the answer would be yes. But was there no exceptions whatsoever that I can't answer?
I guess I should think about
Yeah, I know what you mean, and I don't know if I have an answer to that. Do you? Whether or not it's been a recent change that it seems to be more open to Catholics marrying other folk.
So it's something, canon law calls it disparity of cult. If you marry outside of, if you marry a non-Catholic or a non-Christian, and then you just would need that dispensation. It would be
for both, for non-Catholic and for non-Christian. So
for a non-Catholic,
non-Catholic Christian, or
non-Catholic Christian. Sorry. Yeah. So. Yeah. And so you would just need a dispensation from that, and that would probably, those are granted more often than I would say probably in the the 30s and even the 60s. So there'd just be some kind of, why are you not marrying a Catholic? And it was just more of a cultural thing than anything else. So.
One of my mom's best friends is Catholic and married RCIA, and I never been baptized or anything. So would they have got, what is the word you're saying?
Like a disparity of cult.
Right, or was that not?
It's fancy canon law. So she, as a Catholic, would have had to have gotten a dispensation in order to get married in the Catholic Church with the Catholic form for him. So, to him. So if I had my yellow sheet, I can read kind of how dispensations would work.
But I think it's pretty much anytime a Catholic gets married to a non-Catholic, depending upon the scale, it's just different levels of permission that's needed, or dispensation. Leonardo.
Where I'm originally from, Puerto Rico, the diocese made that if a Catholic was to marry a non-Catholic, the non-Catholic would have to go to the RCIA first and then marry. Like they did.
Well, I don't think that's universal church law. Maybe there's some, I would have to question that. He was saying that a Catholic could only marry somebody after they've gone through RCIA. I don't think that's necessarily a law throughout the land, throughout the universal church. I think with permission it can happen. So I'd be interested to see exactly what that was about. Chase. Okay, so Chase is asking a pretty good question about communion after divorce. And in fact, this was brought up to me the other day because I found out that somebody's probably not receiving communion for something like 20 years when they could have been receiving communion all along. Divorce itself, especially if it wasn't your idea, you know, if maybe just you're divorced because your former spouse just said it's over, you wanted to try and make it work, but it didn't, and there's a divorce. That in and of itself is not something that separates you from communion with God, and so you can still receive communion. Now, where the problem comes in is if there is a second marriage, or if there's sexual relations, you know, some sort of a situation that is taking place, then that's where you wouldn't be able to receive communion because you would be committing adultery. We in the Catholic Church, I always say one of the problems with the Catholic Church is that we believe when people say I do, we believe that they will. And so many places where they take, I guess, marriage less seriously and divorce is a thing and you get remarried and everything's cool, well, that's not the way we look at it. We say till death do us part means till death do us part. Okay? Raise your hand if you feel like you have a decent understanding of what an annulment is about. Basically, it's saying that the bond that took place, even though it looked like it was taking place, everything looked fine from the outside. There's something internally that really wasn't fine, and therefore God didn't bless that marriage from the very start. Right? And so the till death do us part didn't really exist. And that's why that person would then, after an annulment, or 2 or 3 sometimes, can still get married and enter into it wholeheartedly with the bond of God, and that would be their first marriage. And so, divorce itself is not reason, necessarily, that you can't go to communion. It's in many situations, it's not even sinful. Maybe it's a violent situation or whatever, and to separate, because what is a divorce? It's just it's a breaking of a contract on a civil scale. It really has nothing to do with the Catholic Church and its teachings. It's all about a civil thing that takes place in the government. Yeah, Brooke.
So now, a lot of people talk about annulments, happen really pretty soon after marriage. Can they happen? I guess is that kind of protocol is they happen pretty soon after you get married,
So I think in civil law there's a thing called annulments, that if you like say, hey, whoa, like a couple weeks in, this isn't working. I think there can be like an annulment in the civil scheme of things that doesn't necessarily have the same connotation as a Catholic annulment. And that's just so like it's 2 weeks in from the wedding, it was a Vegas thing, and all of a sudden you don't have to go through like the full divorce proceedings to get a civil annulment. That's what I'm understanding, but a lot of hands are going up, so I might be wrong. Wow, Robbie, every minute we take's another century gone. And I promise we won't go more than 20 minutes total, okay? So we won't go more than 10 minutes. Yeah.
My business is responsible for, I work for an attorney, and it has to be within so many, I think it's like a year.
Within a year, you can still get an annulment in the civil side of things.
But very rarely do we get that.
Because there's got to be certain.
There has to be certain certain things that go to MLS and allowing.
Okay. Does that make sense to you? So, okay, thank you.
So I guess, can I follow that up with, could you get a civil divorce and then
Many people do. So many divorces, so many people first get the civil divorce, and then they come and see a priest and say, I want to at least probe into the possibility of seeing whether an annulment is possible. And so what that means is there's a whole court that looks at the ins and outs of what was going on prior to the marriage, at the time of the marriage, and immediately following the marriage, to say, were there reasons that would have kept this from, the promises from truly being made from one side or the other? Leonardo.
So the Catholic Church doesn't do it and annulment to marriage, but they still do this type of thing. The divorce is considered, it's like excommunication.
No. If you get divorced, and even if it just means, if you don't get an annulment in the Catholic eyes, you're still married. Until you get an annulment, in the eyes of the Catholic Church, you're still married. Even though in the eyes of the government, you're not, you're divorced. But in the eyes of the Catholic Church, you're married. And that's okay too. You can be divorced, you can still be married in the Catholic Church, but not living together. Maybe there's a good reason for that, but you can't get married to somebody else.
So like the civil.
You can't start dating somebody else.
So like the state and like the church and that.
In many places, the church and state are not. In America, we're better than we are in many places. I mean, the state will actually take a church wedding and say, okay, I recognize that as a legitimate wedding. In Mexico, I know you have to do both things. You have to go and get kind of the government wedding, and then you can celebrate in a church. Okay, I'm going to go here, and then there, and then there. Yep.
Okay, so my question is not about marriage. It's something that came out last weekend, so what happens when you take communion if you have two celebrations or two masses at the same day? For example, what happened in the 24th, we have the regular...
I can answer that question without you even explaining it any further. Yes, you can, as long as the mass is for different masses. You can't go to like the 9:30 Mass and the 11 o'clock Mass, so the very same Mass, very same readings, very same, and receive two communions. But you can, for example, on a Saturday, if you go to a wedding, and then you go to Saturday night Vigil Mass, or on the 24th, where you have a Christmas Eve Mass and a fourth Sunday or a funeral and a Mass and that kind of stuff. Okay, where are we going next?
So, part of the Catholic marriage was to have children or to accept children and then to raise them in the faith. So does that have a lot of complications, or do you hear about that a lot, say if it was a Catholic married and non-Catholic? Because
So she's bringing up the question of obviously, so the Catholic Church, marriage is for fruitfulness, but also then the raising up of children in the faith. And so she said, is there problems when a Catholic marries a non-Catholic? And the answer is yeah, many times. Yet, on the form, before the marriage can take place, the Catholic has to basically agree that I will do everything in my power to introduce my child to the faith. And then the non-Catholic has to say, I'm aware of that. Has to be aware of the fact that their future spouse will be doing everything in their power to raise that child in the faith. Now, does it work well? It's hard sometimes, okay? On occasion, it works well, but it can be very difficult, very difficult. That's why it's a real serious thing. We have a specific form where we want people to sign, like, do you understand this, Yeah. Well, yeah, and Amy says that many times they don't understand it until they get into it and how difficult it can be. And then did I have, Alex, and then we'll go back there.
Are rings a necessary part of marriage?
I don't think that rings are a necessary part of marriage. It's not part of the form or the matter. Okay? It's just an added thing. And obviously there's an added thing in even the ritual where there's the blessing of the rings, and it's a very beautiful thing. But let's just say, doggone it, forgot those rings. I'm too lazy to go back and get them, so Father can still marry us, right? Yeah, Father could still marry you. It's about the promises. Ultimately, it's the promises that you make to each other. You know, I take you to be my da-da-da-da-da, and good times and in bad. And in those words, when you say those words to each other, that's when it happens. And as one priest I know explains, everything else is just the fluff. But it's beautiful fluff and important fluff that means a lot, including rings and all of that. But it's not part of the... So, we're not going to get into sacramental theology and form and matter. I think we've done that in the past. Back here, and then Michaela, yeah.
If I remember right, one of the 4 aspects of Catholic marriage was
At least to be open to children, for sure.
Jamie and I are probably overrated procreation.
Well, you know, so that's what Abraham thought, right? Huh? Him and Elizabeth about at the age 100. There you go. Here comes Isaac. So whatever God wills. Just name him after either myself or Ryan. Yeah, you know, and even there's in the ritual itself, there's like even a part where it says, and will you, as you're making certain promises, will you be open to children? That for people who are past a certain age, you don't have to include that question as a part of it. But you still have to be open, even if, 75 and what? You're a tricky one. We would say that you got to be open. Right. And Michaela, where are you at? Where'd you go? There you are.
Wedding is a high mass, and it says based on a Saturday evening or Saturday afternoon. Will it fulfill the obligation?
A wedding can fulfill your Sunday obligation, but it has to be beyond a certain time of the day. I had a cousin, for example, that got married on a Saturday night at 7 o'clock or something like that, with the readings of that weekend. I don't know that it must be the readings of that weekend, but it has to be a certain time. And then it can fulfill even the Sunday obligation. Then you can sleep in the next morning. You don't have to get your rear end out of bed to make it to Mass. But I'll tell you something that's also awesome, is when I have a wedding, and then the next morning I see the bride and the groom at Mass with their family. It's so incredible. And what's so disheartening is this, when a bride and groom don't go to Mass the very next day, because they're saying to the whole world, everybody they've invited, this big party, they got the priests there, God's present, and they're like, we invite God in to bless this union. And within 24 hours, they say, but we really don't want this union because we're not going to go to Mass, which is one of the precepts of the church. And I see it, and it makes me want to kick people. Sometimes I do, not very hard. I really don't. But it bothers me. And we got 1 minute left of questions. Let's go with Logan, because Leo asks too many questions already. Trent.
Sacramental marriage looks like a permanent mark in person, just like a priesthood. Is that the same? Is that the case with marriages between non-Catholics?
Yeah, I don't think that actually it leaves an indelible mark. I think baptism, confirmation, and actually ordination. Those three, but marriage doesn't. And yet, two non-Catholics getting married, we do believe is a true bond. And this is always difficult too, when two non-Catholics get married. And then one of them gets divorced and wants to marry a Catholic. We have to ask them to get an annulment. And that can be a very difficult conversation. But I wasn't married Catholic. It doesn't matter. We believe in the marriage you had was till death do you part, even if you didn't believe it. And it's like even two atheists that get married, we're going to say, well, that was a till death do you part kind of union, and so you need to get an annulment. It's tough. I mean, we could have taken it. I think, did you take an entire semester on marriage law?
No, yeah, but I think theology.
Yeah, and so like in canon law classes, I mean, there's so much of it has to do with marriage that you could. They thought about teaching. I think maybe we had an elective of an entire semester just on marriage law. Okay, and final question. Make it a good one, because our boy Robbie is ready to go. He's chomping at the bit. Alan.
Not so much a question, but just adding to your question there about the rings.
Wait, you're not part of the answer. You're either part of the question or nothing. Carry on. I'm kidding.
In like Croatia and those areas, they would use rings. And it's a marriage crucifix that they bless in your house. So, rings are not vital, but...
Must be awfully small if they wear it on their finger, huh? All right, final question. Final question. I'm just kidding. I'm just giving Alan a hard time. What do you call a boy with a rubber toe? Roberto! Come on up, Robbie! Let's hear it for Robbie.
Does this work? This microphone? Yeah? Can you guys hear me, or do I need that? Maybe I don't have it right.
I'll turn it up.
Okay. Okay, let's give it a hand for Father Dale and Father Ryan. All right. All right, so welcome to the greatest topic of RCIA, history, part 2. Church history, part 2. Actually, no, it's history, it's boring, it's facts, and I just go through the timeline. Oh, I can hear myself. Thank you. All right, so I'm doing church history part 2. I'm following after Wally from the first semester. He ended in the 15th century next to the Protestant Reformation. So I'm going to go back just a little bit to the High Middle Ages. But first, I just want to introduce myself. I don't think everyone knows who I am. My name is Robert Jennings, Robbie Jennings for my nickname. I am the Director of Campus Ministry here at St. Isidore, so I'm involved in all the retreats and spring break mission trips and the social justice that we do here. And I help with Focus to put on many of the social events. Why do I like church history? That's a good question. Thank you. Well, I've always been fascinated. I was challenged for my faith back in high school for being a Catholic. And one of the things that they always challenged us on was the Catholic Church history. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm thinking, okay, Christ gave us a church with Judas and Peter. And Judas, we all know what he did. He turned Jesus in, and that was not good. Actually, it ended up being good, for all of us because, he died and resurrected. But still, the church has a lot of blemishes in her day, and yet it still stands. Any other institution in the world over time has been destroyed, has not lasted for 2,000 years. We can trace back our history not just to Jesus, but all the way back to Abraham and Adam, of salvation history, how God has grown the salvation history through the Jews and through the Christians and the Catholics. Just look at our history. Some of the highlights I like to point out. Have any of you guys ever heard of the Cadaver Synod? Wait, show of hands. Thank you, one person. You guys remind me, though, I need help. Can someone pass this out for me? You guys need notes. So, RCIA staff, where are you? I forgot to do this beforehand. You got some notes you can take. Great, thank you. Yeah, so the Cadaver Synod happened in the late 800s. It's a fascinating story because, wait a minute, I can't believe this just happened. So, Pope Moses just passed away. And then there was another pope for about 3 months. And then there was Pope Stephen VI, who did not like Pope Moses. He had a grudge against him. He didn't like all his policies. And so what did he do? He dug the guy up. It's been 8 months now since Pope Moses was dead. He dug the guy up, put him in the seat, and then dressed him up as the Pope, in his garments, and then condemned him for all his policies. He cut off the 3 fingers of his blessing right hand and threw him in the river. Now this is during the dark ages of the papacy. It was like 10 years where it's really dark in the dark ages, like with assassinations and stuff. And you're like, what's going on here? It's Christ's church. Well, this is what I call part of the ugly side of the church. But we went through it. It's fascinating. Church history. I just love it. And yet, don't worry, people who loved Pope Moses did rescue the body, and they were able to quietly put him back in a nice, safe funeral place. A great moment of the church history, Pope Leo the Great, while we talked about him. He turned back the Huns, Attila the Hun. That's amazing. One guy went on and challenged challenged Attila the Hun. And then, of course, the shameful Pope Alexander VI, the most notorious of the Renaissance popes, who had 9 illegitimate children, who he brought to the papacy and acknowledged them. Kind of craziness. Like, this is the church? I don't really have any experience in church history except for one semester of historical foundations in my class. So if you want any questions or answers, this guy right here, Alan Gilbert, he's your guy. And then Father Gale. Sorry. Maybe Father Ryan. I'm just going to give you a bird's eye view of what it is. You know, I try to cram all this stuff in the last 4 months. Oh my gosh. There's so much, and it's so interesting, so enticing, that even a century, you can take years just going over it. Even going over one person's life history, like any of the saints that I'll be talking about. Oh my gosh, it's awesome. So I'm going to recommend you some of the books afterwards, things like that. So, how I want to approach this topic today, we're going to divide into 3 sections. I'll go over a timeline of events, just going through the history of the events. You can list them off. Then we'll talk about how to connect the story from the High Middle Ages and what happened. Why, when the church was such in its glory stage, with the Gothic architecture, Europe was united, and yet what happened? There was a breakdown. Why? What happened? Why did we get where we are today? And then the 3rd section will go over the saints during the last 7th century. Not everyone, because there's a lot. I'll pick out some for you. All right, let's get started. The end of the 14th and 15th century. We have the High Middle Ages. We're in the glory days of the church, as Hilaire Belloc talks about. He thinks this was the best age of the church, of Catholicism, and he decries what happened to it and where we're at today. Kind of agree with him on that, because I love Catholicism, but okay. So, Pope Boniface VIII, he's in power, and he has a disagreement with King Philip IV of France. They don't get along, so King Philip IV sends guards to the Pope's residence, drags him out of bed, and beats him up. Now, Pope Boniface VIII was one of the last strong popes of the High Middle Ages. After that, it kind of went downhill from there for a little bit. And after apparently when he got dragged out, he said, "Okay, I will, come beat me up. I'll be here." And they beat him up, but he didn't die. He did die a few months later, though, of his injuries. And so the next pope, Pope Clement V, was a weak pope. King Philip IV he was a young guy, and he wanted to take control. And he manipulated Pope Clement V to come to France, and Pope Clement V capitulated and moved the whole papacy to the Avignon. You guys probably remember what Wally was talking about. The papacy was always been in Rome, and then for about 70 years it went to Avignon. And about 6, 7 popes were there. We call this the Babylonian captivity of the papacy. At least some people do. I've seen it. So church policy at that time was being more or less dictated by French leaders. At the end of the Babylonian captivity, we have 2 main saints who were involved in trying to bring it back. Saint Bridget of Sweden, and then after her, Saint Catherine of Siena had a major hand to get the papacy back. Let's go. Then this is where it starts, the Great Western Schism. And that continued for 17 years. So what happened? Pope Urban VI was elected after Pope Gregory returned the papacy from Avignon, and his running the papacy caused a lot of anguish, to the point that It drove many of the cardinals against him. Like, he was very austere. He was against the French cardinals. And so the cardinals retaliated. They didn't like him. And they went back to Avignon and reconvened and elected another pope in Avignon. So now we have two popes. So a little bit later down the age, they didn't like that pope. So about 20 years later, the cardinals got back together and elected another pope in Pisa. And so for about 17, let me see here. There was about good 30 years there was, and he can, vouch for it probably later, that the popes, there was three popes that we call the Great Western Schism. Even at the time, during the liturgy, we pray for the pope. They would say, and pray for the right pope, whoever that may be, because they didn't know. Ultimately, the pope in Rome at the time was the ultimate pope, and the other two kind of just fell out. Okay, let's go down the list here. At this time, St. Joan of Arc burned at the stake. She was the young shepherd female at 17 years old who led the French against the England. She got captured, and I'll talk a little bit more about her when we get to the saint section. At this time, there was a council called Florence, like in two different cities, Ferrara and Florence. This happened in 1359, and this was a brief reunion of the great schism in the Catholic Church between the East and the West. There was a brief reunion there, and we all thought there was going to be. The emperors and the cardinals, they all signed an agreement with what happened. Now, what happened was, afterwards, they went back to Constantinople, and it was the city government and the people who were against the reunification of the East and West, so that didn't really last, and that's where we're at today. All right, next. Right after that, about 20 years later, in the 15th century, the Eastern Emperor John VIII Palaiologos capitulated. I read that. Sorry, the guy who sent that was Emperor to that. You follow me? Okay. The Turks captured Constantinople 1453. The capture of Constantinople marked the end of the Byzantine Empire, a continuation of the Roman Empire dating back all the way to the 27 BC. It was an imperial state lasting for nearly 1,500 years. However, don't worry, Christianity was, Orthodox Christianity at that time, the Eastern Christianity was already entrenched in Russia, and what we now know as Moscow and Orthodox Christianity over there. So it lasted even though the Turks took over. All right, next thing, printing is invented, which helped disseminate literature to the masses. Before it was only able for the very wealthy, the very high priest. Everyone was. The majority of the population was illiterate. So this really helped Luther another century afterwards. All right, Spanish Inquisition occurs is the next thing. This all happened in the 14th and 15th century if you're taking notes. If not, that's fine. During the time of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabel, the church was weak and corrupt, and Spain was failing. There was people from the Moors and the Jews who were secretly pretending to convert so they can be in high city government officials. And so at this time they wanted to find a way to be able to separate the guilty from the innocent. And so as Queen Isabel started the Spanish Inquisition. Out of 100,000 people who were prosecuted or looked into, only 2,000 people out of that was executed. There's been a lot of lore and wrong ideas about the Spanish Inquisition, so we can go into that later during questions and answers. And this is just a lot of stuff. All right, another thing that happened in America was discovered by Christopher Columbus, expanding our horizons. After that, we have the 16th and 17th General Councils. Council of Constance notably ended the Great Western Schism, and then, of course, I just talked about the Council of Florence that helped reunite the East and West for a little bit. We're at the end of the 15th century, beginning of the Renaissance. We have weak and scandalous popes, and then we have the rise of nationalism coming. 16th century, the church spreads in India and Japan. St. Francis Xavier, that's where he would be known. In the Philippines, America, Mexico, Chile, Peru, Paraguay, and Brazil. This is where the church has spread. The beginning of the 16th century, we have the Protestant Reformation. Begins in 1517 with Luther posting the 95 Theses on the door. I don't have that. What's the door?
Wittenberg.
Thank you. See, the other guy. The door of Wittenberg. I forgot to put that in here. After that, we have Calvin's church. If it wasn't for Calvin, Protestant might not have really spread as far as it did. But Calvin, when he vacated to Sweden, Switzerland. Switzerland. It was his church structure organization that kept the Protestant church formed and was able to reduplicate many times over. We also have Henry VIII, once a champion of Catholicism and also a defender of the faith by the Pope, was again, he wanted to have an annulment, and, well, the Pope wouldn't let him. And so he, out of his selfish desires, decided to also rebel against the church. But in his own way, it's called Anglicanism, and there's a lot of high liturgy borrowed from the Catholicism church. It's so much different than Lutheran and Calvinism. But we'll get back into that. More things in the 16th century. Persecution starts to occur in Europe against the Catholics. Christendom is divided anew because of the Protestant Reformation. The Catholic Counter-Reformation occurs, yet albeit slowly. It took us some time, but this is where we had a lot of foundations of new orders. The Jesuits, the Oratorians, the Capuchins, and some others. I didn't list them here. We have the famous Council of Trent that rebuked the Protestant Reformation and also established many of the decrees on justification, faith. The amount of books in the Bible was finally formally recognized, but that was recognized all the way back to 360, back to the Council of Hippo. But finally, it was finally formally recognized. 17th century, continued expansion of the church, especially in America. Widespread persecution of Catholics throughout Europe. Take a note. Good read. When I was living at the monastery for 9 months, about 2 years ago, they usually do a table reading of a book. One of the books that we were reading was The Autobiography of a Hunted Priest. Have anyone ever read that before? Show of hands. No, so go out and buy it because it's awesome. It's by John Gerard. He was a Jesuit priest in England at the time who was being hunted by Brazilian people, and for being Catholic. I don't know what they're called, sorry. But it was a very fascinating work. He was captured and he went to the Tower of London where he had his famous escape from there, and so this is all, it's an autobiography, so those pretty cool. So we'll check that out. We got the famous Galileo case, where Galileo was challenging the idea that the Earth was not the center of the solar system, but the sun was, and he was using a telescope. Now the church, there's a lot of, once again, this is a very hot topic for people who are against the Catholic Church. There's a lot of, there was some wrongdoing on the church, but there's some also from fabrication. So look into what happened there. At the end of the 17th century, we had apparitions of the Sacred Heart to St. Margaret Mary. That occurred. 18th century, missions in China and Korea. The Jesuits were suppressed. So 17th century, the 16th century, the foundation of the Jesuits by St. Ignatius Loyola. They became very rich, a very powerful entity, And in Spain, the Charles III of Spain, the King Charles III, was very jealous of the organization and did not want them to be a rival power. So he suppressed them in Spain and then challenged Pope Clement XIV, intimidated him to kind of make him suppress Jews overall. And so that's what happened. Other things that happened in the 18th century, some relief for English Catholics. The French Revolution begins. And there was a big thing that happened. And we'll go a little bit more into what happened there later. But we have the Reign of Terror that happened in France, where many of the Catholics, priests, and nuns were sought out, executed, guillotined, all kinds of horrific stuff that happened there. Fascinating reading, though, if you're able to do that kind of stuff. Growth of skepticism, the modernists, and the decline of faith all over. We have Descartes and Hume and Kant, big philosophers of the centuries there. Descartes, he's famous for the saying that, I think, therefore I am. And he actually said that. He said something else, and that's what just, attributed to him. But Kant is the one that kind of said that there is a spiritual realm, but it is not, and it cannot have any access to the natural realm. So there's no point even trying to go for it. And so he was one of the major players in the modernist movement, and where we get a lot of our thinking nowadays, where we can access spiritual realm, executing on default beyond that, where there is no spiritual realm. So at least he believed, but he doesn't even think about it. Let's see here. The Redemptorists and Passionists were founded by St. Alphonsus de Liguori and Paul of the Cross, respectively. Bishop Challenger's work for the Catholic revival in England happened. The Quakers and Methodists were founded. In the 19th century, conflict between Napoleon and Pope Pius VII. Now the Jesuits are reinstated in 1814, so that's great. Persecution at different times in France, Switzerland, Spain, Portugal, Mexico, Prussia, and etc. Catholic emancipation and revival in England happened with the restoration of the hierarchy and, of course, conversion of Newman, Cardinal Newman, Manning, Faber, and others to the Oxford movement. So high time for Oxford, and just top Catholics. Great stuff. Dogmatic definition of the Immaculate Conception happened in 1854, where Pope, actually I don't have that written down, but does anyone know, Alan, the Pope who made that declaration? Father?
Nope.
No, okay. So the Pope at that time made the declaration that the Immaculate Conception happened, which we all know that it was Mary who was conceived without original sin. So that happened. Great progress in America. So that's all we want to say there. Pius IX's service of errors against the modernist philosophy going on at the time. We have the First Vatican Council, 1869 to 1870, which talked about the definition of papal infallibility, because there's a lot of challenge against the papacy and the Pope and his power, and also the belief that human reason can, yes, Hayden? Pope Pius IX, write that down for the Immaculate Conception. Thank you, Hayden. Awesome. Google, such a wonderful thing. Okay, Pope, yes, the second thing for that Vatican Council I was to talk about how reason can believe in God. Like, the church gave the best and most humble definition of the human mind, that we were able to believe in God and able to prove that God exists through the 5 proofs that St. Thomas Aquinas. He kind of done that. All right. Then we have Kulturkampf in Germany. What is that? Kulturkampf. 1871 to 1891, this is the bitter struggle on the part of the German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck to subject the Roman Catholic Church to state control. So this happens all the time, where the church is constantly being challenged by the nationals, by the people in charge, social encyclicals of Leo the 13th. That happened. Our Lady reveals the Miraculous Medal in 1830 and appears at Lourdes to St. Bernadette in 1858, the 20th century. The epic spread of the church in Africa, native clergy are in the mission field. St. Pius X, Pope Pius X, promotes frequent communion and reforms church music. When he was young, when he was a kid, about 11 years old, he complained that how come I can't receive daily communion? Back then it was once a month or maybe in a yearly thing, and they said, okay, when you're Pope, you can change it. So guess what? He became Pope, he changed it. That's awesome. And I think it was first Pope in a long time who was a parish priest, a parish priest became Pope. Usually it was like a theologian or a doctor, like a canon lawyer, but this was a humble parish priest who became Pope, going through all the stages. So that's pretty cool. Condemnation of modernism happened again. Then we have the two world wars in 1914 and then in 1939. We have the spread of communism, one of the very anti-Catholic beliefs out there. The Lateran Treaty restores temporal sovereignty to the popes in the papal states around here. Growth of the lay apostolate, Catholic action. How many of you guys heard of Dorothy Day? So she was part of that movement. The new Code of Canon Law. Finally, we have something that describes everything that goes on in the Catholic Church and all the rules and dictates. That happened in 1918. Persecutions in Russia, Eastern Europe, Spain, Mexico, Northern Ireland. Those all happened in the early 20th century. We have appearances of Our Lady at Fatima in 1917 with 2 to 3 children, and definition of her assumption into heaven in 1950. We have a success of the Communist Revolution in China and Cuba. The Korean War happened in 1950 to 1953, and now we are at the Second Vatican Council in 1962-1965. During the time of Cultural Revolution in America, which happened in the 60s as well. And the Vatican, this is the first church council that wasn't against a heresy. Like all the other 21 ecumenical councils was always against something that happened. It was always a reaction. Until it was challenged, there was no point in talking about it. But this time, there was no really reaction. It was just trying to reestablish what happened at Vatican Council I, which ended abruptly because of the Prussia War that happened there. So they came back in 1962, closed Vatican I at that time, and then reopened Vatican II to reflect on the church. And it was a big movement. It took 4 years. And even our last two popes were involved significantly in making some of the documents that happened out of that. 4 of the main documents that came out of it was Lumen Gentium, which was on the church and her relations of what she sees as herself. Sacrosanctum Concilium, which was on the liturgy and talking about how to pride of place of words being saw in the liturgy, and how that works. We have trying to figure out the other two. Gaudium Spes for the world. The modern world is talking about that, and then of course the Word of God, which is very, very, I love that one. It talks about how the church reviews the Bible and how to think, read the Bible, how to implement and interpret the Bible in the church's eyes and the tradition of the church. Great stuff. And then of course there was 12 other documents that if you never had a chance to read it, you guys should definitely read it. All right, let's go back. We have the re-emergence of modernism right after that, Now More. The age of the laity, you guys come rise up to take part in church services, lectors, altar servers, just be more involved. Then we have a second new code of canon law in 1983, which is our modern canon law right now. We have Roe and versus Wade goes into effect here in America. Abortion is legalized. Attack on the family is heightened. The collapse of the communist governments in Eastern Europe, falling in Germany, Pope John Paul II was a major influence in that. The end of the 20th century, we have the European Union and other international trade agreements making us a smaller world. The melding of the world into more economic unity. And then, of course, the beginning collapse of nationalism. The collapse of the faith in the West and its phenomenal growth in some third world countries. Like we've become first world countries in Australia, England, Europe, America. The faith has been dwindling very far, very fast. But it's very popular up in Africa. We're getting a lot of locations where they're being sent here to re-evangelize us. Funny, actually. 21st century. 9/11, 2001 occurs. War on terror begins, and been going on since then. Pope Benedict XVI resigns, first pope to do that since Pope St. Celestine V, right before Pope Boniface VIII. Remember Pope Boniface VIII? He came right after Pope Celestine V. Great story about that. Oh man, go look it up. All right. First Jesuit Pope, Pope Francis. We never had a Jesuit Pope, and now he's here, and he's doing great service for us. And then, of course, last but not least, age of technology, the age of me. We're so obsessed with ourselves, and we don't even look upon each other anymore. We're all part of what's in it for me. So that's the end of the timeline, part A of your work, if you are taking notes. So now we're going to, should we take a break? I think, sure. Yeah, go ahead. All right, break time. I don't know how long we got. 8:05, 10 minutes.